I think there's a really important idea of kind of an individual spiritual journey or an individual cosmos, which Jung reflects in the Red Book, which is uniquely his. I think that's what's being asked of us in this time of religious kind of crisis and alienation.
Christina Becker, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast. It's been
Oh,
a few years, so it's nice to see you again.
it's nice to see you. Yeah, it has been few years. I can't quite remember when that was. Um,
I think it was during COVID times, maybe.
uh,
I mean,
yeah,
has gotten really squirrely since 2020.
it really has. I think it was around the time that I was launching this kind of astrological, psychological course that I was doing called Personality as Path. Because I think we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about the connection between Jung and astrology and depth psychology and how can we use astrology to, deepen our own understanding of ourselves and where we are in our big journey. So I think that was our subject, which
Yeah,
is still a passion for me. So it's all good.
yeah. It's kind of an evergreen subject, yeah.
yeah,
Lifelong project.
yeah, totally. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm speaking to you from southern Vancouver Island, and you're in Toronto, my old stomping grounds.
Yes. I moved recently. I think the when we talked last, I was in my condo, which was, in Roncesvalles Village. I moved from there to a townhouse not far, like being on the ground, like to be in a little quieter neighborhood. So lots of changes in the last, yeah, year or so.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife and I, before we left Toronto, we had a little house in the Junction before,
Yes.
right at the cusp of it being gentrified, I think. We got out just
Yeah.
before then. But I love that area.
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic. It's actually quite good, and it's very gentrified.
Yeah, well, what can you do?
I,
Maybe better
I,
coffee shops, that's a
yeah,
plus.
yes, exactly. Lots of good coffee shops. Yeah.
Well, we're here to talk on the occasion of your forthcoming book.
Yeah.
And of course, anytime I hear the phrase soul making, my ears perk up.
Mm.
I go, okay, this is one of my people here. And, I've been reading through your book over the past couple days, and I feel a lot of kinship with you. I think we share a lot of the same teachers, a lot of the same
Yeah.
things that have inspired me have also inspired you. And
Yeah.
so it's just really nice to read that. And
Thank you.
also, it's, these ideas about soul making and soul are really embedded in this story of your
Mm.
own struggles and healing and the night sea journey that you take us on. And so it's a very revealing and vulnerable account, which is kind of rare in the Jungian world to get that kind of personal testimony to how this stuff actually
Mm.
works in my life, not just in
Yeah.
clients' lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, there was a lot of debate about whether I would take it into the world the way that I did, but I feel like it's really important to show how to process some of these very difficult kind of experiences that people have, and that felt like a kind of a overriding compelling call for me, which was to say, you know our journeys are so personal, right? And so individual. And most of it, we live it in our heads, we live it internally. And it's very difficult to share, what that journey is. Um, and I, and I find that within the Jungian community is that we have lost that connection to experience. How do I experience this particular thing? Do I experience it from the level of my childhood trauma, which of course is Hillman's main idea, or do I experience it from a perspective of somewhat detachment or witnessing so that I can actually bring some meaning to it. As Gigerid says, who am I that this is happening to me? What is it in my personality that is pulling a particular experience? And so it's hard to really convey that in the consulting room without actually sharing our own personal experience. And people want to know that. They want to know how to come to terms with some of the crappy things that are happening. So I felt like that was one of the main reasons for me to write it in the way that I did, and also the most challenging.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reminded of I can't call him a spiritual teacher because he would refuse that. But U.G. Krishnamurti, who is a contemporary of the more famous J. Krishnamurti, who was a spiritual teacher, and there's an institute built around his teachings and all that. But U.G. refused all of that and had this very profound enlightenment experience. And what he would do is just go to friends' houses, and people would gather to ask him questions and talk with him. And so he had a lot of people, these spiritual seekers, come to him, this Indian guru who's like in the natural state and all of that.
Right,
And
right.
what he would, when someone would go on, usually a man full of these like spiritual, lofty ideas of non-duality and such, when he would be going on about that, he would always question them, well, how is that functioning in your life?
Right, exactly.
Which is a big question to ask. And I think sometimes that's the question that I even have listening to Jungian experts talk about all these lofty ideas and concepts
Mhm.
of the, ego self-access and all that. And I go, well, how is it
Yes,
functioning in your life? Because that's like where the rubber hits the road.
totally. Absolutely. And um, yeah, and it is one of my perennial questions that I ask all of my clients, okay, that's fine and good, but what are you going to do with that? How are you going to, I've had a couple of actually some conversations this week where somebody's throwing around the word animus or an anima and all that kind of stuff, and it is very lofty. And I go, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do you experience it? Because, as you said, that's where the rubber meets the road. And I think we need to understand that, right? Because that's how we live it.
Mhm.
Um, one of the things that is what I really, well, I didn't, I was going to use the word discover, but I don't think that's the actual right word. I think the word is fully appreciate that Jung brought his own experience. He had his own experience, which started very young for him. And then he had the experience of being with his clients. And he tried to come to some sense about what does that experience mean. Then he, then was able to form his thoughts and his theories and things like that. But it all started from experience.
Mhm. Yeah.
And right. And I think that's where we've got to start from.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
understanding that Jung's psychology is a reflection of his experience, that to take on Jung's psychology is in a
Yeah.
way taking on someone else's psychology. And you go through like a crisis of faith with
Yeah.
Jungian analysis in the book
Yeah.
when you really,
Yeah.
hit some hard times and you start to question like,
Mm.
is this talk therapy? Is this kind of psychological analysis? Is it really help people? Is it really helping me?
Totally. That was really quite the eye opener to realize that I had this unconscious projection on Jung and analytical psychology that, wow, I'm conscious. I've had gobs and gobs of analysis, and it didn't protect me. It wasn't an immunity to tragedy. Um, and um, that was really hard. And I think part of it that was hard about it was that it was still lofty. It was still like this idea of the self, was still a lofty idea for me. I didn't quite know what it looked like in my life. I have a sense now.
Hmm.
Um, and, through my own spiritual practice and, diving a little bit more into the New Thought movement, which, is part of my heritage with my paternal grandmother, and Christian Science, which is their faith. And I was introduced to that, but seeing a real connection between New Thought and Jungian psychology. So there's some of these ideas where God is within, much like the self is within. New Thought would say, what is the divine idea of itself as my life? Right? You can say, what is the self's idea? What is the self's idea of itself as my life? Right? Is how does that unique expression of wholeness want to come through and be expressed, in my creativity, in my relationships, and how I make a living, all of those things. And I think that really is the truth about individuation, and how I think we're supposed to live it. So
Hmm.
I think what needed to happen was that I needed to read, much like I think like Job, did, in the way that Jung describes the answer to Job in the book, is that Job needed to redefine his definition of God. God needed to redefine the definition of itself. And I think my journey was to really redefine, my definition of the self, of God, and my spiritual life. And that's actually sustained me now for a good long time. Um,
Hmm.
which is really, I just deepen it. And through that, like I have a very strong sense of purpose. Like I know that being an analyst is what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. Like I just know that. And then, as you know, I have this other thing, which is nonprofit consulting and board training. I know that that's part of what it is that I need to be doing in this world. It's not grand, it's not lofty, it's just what I do. And I think that's really about this. That's for me this lived connection to this inner divine.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I have trouble with terms like self.
Yeah.
So I think like even like Jung's way of using it changes depending on the
Mm-hmm.
context and when he's talking about it. Like um, using like terms psyche and soul in a differentiated way, but then also in a way that seems like he's talking about the same thing. And maybe it depends on who he's talking to, is what
Yeah.
terminology he'll use. Because so yeah, I've always wrestled with some of the terminology around that, and I guess part of my journey is rooting down into what my own conceptions
Mm.
of who I am, uh, you know, even getting into the metaphysics of it, or even just like a kind of a story around what soul is for me,
Mm.
what the heart is
Mm.
for me.
Mm.
Uh, and that's, I guess, what comes out of that is my own kind of psychology in a way.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
I think part of like the journey of your book is like honoring your own inner wisdom to find like,
Mm.
well, what's true for me? I know what's true for Jung,
Mm.
or I can like guess at what was true for Jung, but what's true for me? And that's something that really emerges in the book, and this
Yeah.
openness to the kind of the new age world of Wayne Dyer and Joe
Yeah.
Dispenza and Caroline Myss and
Mm.
all these people like who Jungians might kind of scoff at as being kind of woo-woo New Agers or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I think that is I think that's the essence of Max Zeller's dream,
Mm.
right? Which I talk about right at the beginning. And I think that's also the essence of Jung's Red Book. Like Jung said to everybody, you have to create your own red book, right? Create your own red book. And there's a really important dream for me, in those months in which I started to metaphorically get my head above water, in which I had a dream in which there's my black journal at the bottom of a pool and it's in a red case, and it kind of emerges, or some figure goes down and collects it, or I go down, I can't quite remember. But it is that it is our unique journey. It's our unique kind of creating our unique spirituality. And I think there's a really important idea of kind of an individual spiritual journey or an individual cosmos, which Jung reflects in the Red Book, which is uniquely his. And we create our own. So my spiritual practices reflect any energy work. They reflect my experience of being on the mountain in the Andes, doing a shamanic thing, journeying pilgrimage, new thought. It's just like
Astrology. Hmm. Hmm.
astrology, tarot cards, a whole bunch of things. And they just kind of, it's this kind of hodgepodge of things, but is deeply meaningful for me and work for me and give me information and guide me on my journey. I think that's what's being asked of us, in this time of religious kind of crisis and alienation.
Mm.
um yeah. So, and
Yeah.
and all of that is like, what is true for me, right?
Hmm.
What is my truth? Yeah.
And what sustains me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
I'm totally with you. I've started a series on Substack recently that is the way I frame it is DIY shamanism, but it's really like kind of an extension of like Thomas More's book, A Religion of One's Own,
Yep.
and Jung's imploring us to create our own red book and to discover what the myth is that we're living and all of that. And I love that you started with Max Zeller's dream. And for people who aren't aware of it, can you just kind of lay it out for us?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so Max Zeller, give me one sec. I want to make sure that I get the right, so you may have to edit this out. I want to make sure I get the right thing.
Yeah, give an accurate account of, I mean,
Yeah,
the way he
exactly.
tells it. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So, Max Zeller was, um, a German Jew who, fled Germany during the war. He fled to the United States in Los Angeles. And at the end of the 1940s, he had come back to Zurich. Jung was his analyst, his training analyst. And so he come back to Zurich to really think about, what's his role, what is the analyst's role in society. Like, that was his kind of pilgrimage. And one of the things that I think is really important for us in our soul making journey is to ask those existential questions, but we have to ask them in such a way that actually leads us on a quest. There's so many questions that we ask ourselves which are so disempowering. They actually, they have a negative bent, but we really have to ask empowering questions. And his question was, you know you know what is the analyst's task in the world, and what's the analyst's task for him now that the war was over. And he was having his little crisis of fate, so it's really interesting. He talks about this in his book, The Dream, the Vision of the Night. And he'd gone to Zurich. He was about ready to go home. And so he has his last session with Jung, and he's going back on the train, and he forgets that he has this dream that morning. He forgets to tell Jung this dream, which I think is so interesting. That he's not intended to see Jung again for a really long time, maybe ever. And he goes, "Oh my God, I had this dream." Right?
Hmm.
So many kind of things that we forget to tell our analysts that until after we leave.
Right. Maybe it's like a little resistance,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So in the dream, uh, he says there's a vessel, a temple, a vast dimension, which is in the process of being built. As far as I can see, ahead, behind, right, and left, there were incredible numbers of people building on giant pillars. I too was building on a pillar. The whole building process was in its very beginnings. The foundation was already there. I think that's such a important piece. The foundation is already there, and we're just adding. We're adding the outside things. The rest of the building was starting to go up, and I and many others are working on it, and that's the dream. So he writes a note. He gets back to Zurich. He writes a note to Jung, say, "I had this dream. I probably won't see you again, but I thought I'd tell you about the dream." Jung invites him back the next day, and he talks about it. And what Jung says is, yeah, this temple is that we're the temple that we are all building on. This is the new religion. And so that's like 1949. Could be the age of Aquarius as opposed to the age of Pisces. That's my fantasy. Where we are all this kind of collective image where we're all building something. Maybe we all have our own little piece. But I think what is for me so beautiful about the dream is that the soul is speaking directly through the dream to us, which is there's something new that needs to be built here. There's a new religious or spiritual component that is the focus of analytical work. And that's my interpretation. That's my fantasy
hmm.
about that dream.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of criticism of the age of the individual,
Mm,
right?
mm,
But if we take this view of it, it gives it a different feeling,
mm,
that it's not about us becoming so self-absorbed and disconnected from one another, but that the world soul or the great spirit or whatever
mm.
is
Yep,
asking something of us that's different than it has been in the past, where it's been about building a collective vision, a
yep,
monotheism, a universal one religion. And we're in a different period now that to not like necessarily pathologize that, but maybe to see that, well, maybe the world is asking something different of us now.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
interesting because it's not one person building a pillar all on their own. They're building on the same foundation and it's part of the same structure. So all of those
yeah,
individual pillars will support maybe something else, another level or a roof or something like that. And I find that
mm,
really interesting. Like it's another
yeah,
way to look at the age of the individual.
yeah, totally. And Jung said, "Oh, it's going to take 600 years." I'm not, I'm not quite sure about that. I think it's going to take a lot less time. Uh, but there is this idea of the relationship between the individual and the collective, relationship between our own individuation. And in some ways, if we apply this notion of God, like the quantum field, like the unity, like the universe, the one verse, then anything that we do individually, if we expand our awareness, expand our consciousness, then that does have an effect on, you know, every other energy field in the in the, in the universe. It's not that self-centered, but it does place a tremendous responsibility. What do we want to put into the world? What do we want to put into the universe? What kind of energy that we want to put in? And I think there's the call. But each of the pillars could be various, religious traditions or spiritual traditions that all have that one foundation. And I talk a lot about the perennial philosophy, which I think is what Jung tapped into. I couldn't find a specific reference in which he said, oh, yes, this is connected to the perennial philosophy. But I think some of his ideas are reflected in that. And I'm just having this insight just this second that it is possible that that foundation is that universal notion of which we all stand, is that there is a divine reality, there is a connection of the soul's longing to be related to that divine reality. And we all have a kind of a soul's journey that is both psychological and spiritual.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think he was definitely aware of Aldous Huxley because he does reference him in the letters when he's talking about mescaline and drug use, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's possible that he read, perennial philosophy, but
Oh,
regardless,
hello.
here's Suki. I told you she'd make an appearance. Um, yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Oh, yeah, now Suki's distracted me. I forgot where I was going to go with that. But okay, I don't know.
Well, we were talking about the connection between Jung and perennial philosophy, and you said he was kind of, we were talking about the foundation, and whether he was aware of the perennial philosophy. It's hard to
Mhm.
know, because his library is so vast.
Yeah.
And
Well, I was thinking, I mean, the perennial
yeah,
philosophy isn't so much different than the Platonic idea of the nous, of the one,
yeah,
and
mm,
the polytheism of the Greek world being all
yeah,
these differentiated individual expressions of the divine
yeah,
is just kind of
yeah.
extending that into the human world. And,
Hmm.
my personal religion is my expression of my relationship to
Yeah,
the divine. And
yeah,
so, but it's all held in that idea of the one, like a
mm,
great tapestry with many threads.
totally love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And what does that have to do with the Age of Aquarius? Is there something about the kind of individual or the personal myth and personal spirituality associated with the Age of Aquarius?
Well, I think so. Well, and also Neptune has just gone into Aries, and there's a connection between that and when last time Neptune was in Aries, there was the rise of Aries being, the individual, Neptune being kind of spirituality. This new thought movement kind of arose out of that. But I think the I think that the Age of Aquarius, is about a more unified relationship with the divine, a more parallel kind of idea, rather than the fish, which are kind of swimming in opposite directions. And so the Age of Pisces being the duality between good and evil, light and dark, right? Also, not, not,
Man and God, like
yes,
in the embodiment of Jesus Christ, fully human and fully divine.
yes,
Still two, not one.
yes, exactly. And I think this idea of a unified awareness, a unified consciousness, energy field, quantum, this idea that there, that the scientists are now being, mystified by by um
Yeah.
by what's happening,
Yeah,
right?
and the implications of quantum theory, right? Like
Exactly.
it's getting very close to metaphysics and spirituality and yeah.
Exactly.
But the kind of ironic thing is that it's like, well, it all just seems like another expression of like Indra's net, the old Indian idea. You know,
Mm,
it's like Indra's net, this web of all these
yeah.
differentiated jewels,
Yeah.
all reflecting different aspects of the
Mhm,
cosmos.
mhm,
It's a pretty enduring image, and it stands up
mm.
to even like quantum physics and the developments there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that image, but like it's a perfect image of that everything is interconnected.
It's differentiated, but it's all interconnected. It's all part of a whole. Like we don't
Yeah,
lose
yeah.
the differentiation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, this idea that, coming back to Jung, how am I a unique expression of the self, God, the web, the quantum field, the universe embeds both of those concepts, right? The idea that I'm a unique individual with specific life circumstances, but I'm also part of the one.
Yeah.
I'm part of the whole in a way, and understand that I then have a responsibility at some level to the whole, and also I can co-create with the whole,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Great.
yeah, yeah, I love that image. I hadn't heard about that image.
Hey, if you haven't already, take a moment, like this video and subscribe to the channel. It actually really helps. And look, if you really want to support the podcast, consider becoming a Patreon member. Starting at just $5 a month, you get early release of all episodes weeks before they're out to the public with no ads, no interruptions. We do a monthly call where we get together and we talk about topics like the one we're talking about on this podcast, me and you and other cool people. And you get other stuff. There's a private RSS feed that you can subscribe to and listen to extra bonus content on your favorite podcast player. It's really great and it's growing. So go to patreon.com/howl in the wilderness and join up. I think this is like a great transition to the idea of soul making, like talking about,
Yeah.
what is our task here? What is our contribution to the whole?
Mm,
Um, and you title your book Soul Making. It's a term that resonates with me. I got it from Hillman, and he got it
yeah.
from John Keats, the poet.
Yep. Yep.
So just I'd love to hear how you think of soul making because it can be a bit of a tough to grasp concept, if
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. So I think the way I have come to uh, feel about soul making is comes from this ancient idea that what is in the way is the way. That life gives us particular challenges, whatever, and it's through our processing of those experiences, mediating those experiences, that we grow and become more solid, more comprehensive, and give ourselves a sense of meaning, right? I mean, my way of understanding the soul is that it is a mediating energy between the outside world and our inner experience. And so how we experience or how we come to terms with it, or our interpretation of our outer experience, can be at various levels of awareness. We can experience and interpret our experience as, oh my God, this happened when I was 3 and I'm a victim and I'm totally, I'm screwed for the rest of my life, yada, yada, yada. As we make soul, or soul makes us, I think that's more important. Soul makes us through our experiences. Our experience of interiority expands, our consciousness expands, and as our consciousness expands, we're able to, instead of being taken out at the knees from our experience, from our outer events, we're able to come to it with a greater sense of strength, understanding and awareness that this thing is not designed to kill me or, flatten me or whatever, but it's designed for me to grow, to give a better understanding of myself, and to become more solid, like as in more comprehensive, and to develop my interiority, right? My own sense of soul, my own experience of soul. That's how I've kind of come to really live it and to understand it.
Hmm.
That makes
Uh,
sense. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think for me, it's, while I do have a metaphysical belief in the soul
Hmm.
and in past lives, I just have enough evidence that it'd be hard to convince me otherwise. Or,
Got it.
yeah. But I also think like there is something about like the idea that soul is a quality, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a substance. I think
Yeah.
Hillman would say it's not a substance. He didn't get into metaphysics, but
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
say, it is a substance in my belief, but it also is a quality. And
Yeah.
just colloquially, when we talk about someone being soulful or an experience being
Mm.
soulful, and thinking about what that means for us, like
Yeah.
something, when someone is soulful, they have that kind of capacity that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they've seen a lot, they've experienced a lot. Not a lot
Mm.
is going to shake them. And so they
Right.
become like a kind of more solid, substantial pillar of the community. Like an elder
Yeah.
should
Yep.
have a lot of soul because they should have
Yeah.
gone through experience, been
Yeah.
affected by them deeply, but not destroyed by them. And that's
Yeah.
what gives them that kind of gravity, that weight,
Yep.
that reliability, um, something about that. So there's something about how we take in experience
Yep.
and allow ourselves to be affected by it. Um, yeah. And so I like just these days, I think more about like soul making is also tricky for me. Like you said, like does soul make us or do we make soul? And so I just think about, for me, it's just simply like wanting to live a soulful life
Yeah. Totally.
and
And
thinking about what that
also,
means for each of us.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you're a musician, like having when you're deeply affected by a piece of music, when you're maybe playing or you're listening and you're really touched, your energy just vibrates in the magnitude of what you're, either playing or, that for me is also soulful. Or having an amazing conversation with somebody like you probably
Mm.
do, like we're having right now, Gary. Like
Yeah.
it's having resonance for me, which means that it is a soulful conversation.
Yeah.
And I think the quality, I think that's right.
Yeah. And it's often difficult for me recording soulful conversations and putting them out as podcasts because much of the experience is felt in my heart. And
Yes. Yeah.
I often expend a lot of energy thinking about the audience and then wanting to communicate the felt sense that I'm experiencing in the conversation. Whereas if it
Mm.
was just you and I talking off air, maybe we'd be just sitting in silence with something and just being in the resonance, and allowing
Yeah.
that to just be
Yeah.
and vibrate.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're thinking about the invisible third here and wanting so I got to like jump up into the head and try to find words for the felt experience, which for me is always like a
Yeah.
difficulty.
Well,
Like,
totally, Brian. It's hard. I mean, I think that was the hardest thing that was in the writing
mhm,
for me, was trying to convey that experience. And again, I called Firefly creative writing out in before, but I want to do it again. It was like, in a way, like writing a novel, right? I had to get into a different part of my brain to describe the experience. And it was like, trying to find the language to convey what was actually going on. And it was one of the reasons why I think it took so long, because you read my first book. It's so heady. It's not bad, but it's so full of concepts and so most of my struggles were about trying to get out of the head and into the body, in terms of how to write about the experience. And it took a long time and a lot of coaching and
Mm,
a lot of people to listen to some of those early drafts to say, have I been able to convey what my experience is? Because that, I think, going back to your first question, I think people want a way to frame their experience, right?
yeah.
Jung having this dream or having, of the turd, let's say, falling on the Basel Cathedral, or having the vision in the train of blood rushing over the Swiss Alps. Like, you talk about that with people these days, they'd think you're nuts and they'd say, I think you should go to the psychiatric hospital because, but people have these visions and these experiences all the time.
Hmm.
And how can we, that the I think one of my favorite stories is being in the pilgrimage of Peru, right? And I'm sitting on the side of the lake Pumacanchi, having, with the shaman and doing a meditation, and experiencing, having an image in my mind of a water spirit coming up and say, you're too much in your head, you're not in your feelings. And then that night, the pipe underneath the sink in my room bursts, and
Hmm.
there's water everywhere, right? Fortunately, my stuff is up and all that kind of stuff. But it was, I mean, that and, this kind of, to that explosion of feeling, symbolically in that story feels like so, that speaks to, right? It speaks
That
to that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to what soul making is or what it
Mm,
looks like in action. So, like one of the ways that Hillman described his conception of soul is that it's the thing that transforms events into experiences.
mhm, mhm,
Right. And so you're seeing the synchronicity of the pipe bursting related to this vision that you had, really taking that in, having that different kind of symbolic perspective
mhm.
of it or interpretation of it. That is making soul. It then becomes a
Yeah,
soulful experience rather than just an event. Well, yeah, I had
yeah.
that vision, and then the pipe burst, and not seeing what connects the two and why it's significant.
Yeah, totally. Well, and that's how I start the book, with the idea of my computer crashing on the 10th anniversary of my father's death, right? And that idea that it's like, oh, Jesus, making the connection between those two events. I mean, for me, it was like in the morning, right? I wake up, oh gosh, it's a significant day, it's September, 2020, my father died 10 years ago. And then opening up my computer and like the whole, I get the blue screen of death. Um, and I'm thinking, so, looking at that symbolically, making the connection between the two things, I think is important. And some of those questions we can't actually have an answer to. So, of course, the big event that leads to the writing of the book is my brother's death from fentanyl, and one of those Canadian opioid deaths that was significant during the pandemic. And he died on the same day that Gord Downey died, right?
For
And my
non-Canadians, the singer of the
okay,
Tragically Hip, a revered Canadian band,
yeah.
he was a pretty amazing poet and singer. Yeah.
And my brother Paul loved him, loved Gord Downey. And also it happened to be my maternal grandfather's birthday was October 17th, who's also named Gord.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I mean, I don't know whether that's just how the universe manifested itself or Paul did that. I don't know whether he did that intentionally because he was pretty tortured soul, but the significance of the date is really profound. And I think, dates give us, or, to track dates and to track when things happen is also a very important act of soul making. using astrology, that kind of thing.
hmm hmm
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so we could say maybe soulmaking requires a particular kind of perspective.
Hmm.
Like what I noticed too, it's like, okay, so you have this, anniversary of your father's death. All of your work is on this computer. The computer doesn't want to work for you, doesn't want to start up. One way to take that is to kind of take it personally and like from the victim perspective, like,
Yep.
why me? Every time I try to do something,
Yeah.
technology that always goes wrong. And but if you've got this like kind of soul-oriented
Mm.
perspective, it takes you out of the personal,
Yes, totally.
and it's like, huh, interesting. Look at
Yep.
what happened here. Why now? Why this?
Yep.
And it leaves you with these bigger questions, but it doesn't keep you focused on the personal, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And so, in dreams, often, like when people dream of computers or, you know, it is an interesting image of psyche, right? Because you've got all of the stuff in the computer, and it processes experience, like it processes things, emails and word documents and things like that. um and it's a really interesting metaphor for how the psyche, how our own psyche works.
hmm
And so I think that was that's a very interesting
Right.
symbol, right?
Yeah, like your psyche was about to break down.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Overloaded, time for a defrag, for a reboot.
Yeah, the operating system is kaput.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of cool how like, a computer in a dream could be talking about something in the external world, but something in the material mundane world could also be speaking to something of psyche. Like it's a two-way street,
Yeah,
and it kind of
absolutely.
shows you that interconnectedness and the tenuousness of the barriers that we,
Mm,
believe to be there as maybe a kind
yeah,
of
totally.
defense against the bigness of it all. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, and the bigness, it can be a little overwhelming, right?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I just kind of pulled this quote the other day and I'm not going to get it right, but Jung's conception of God being that which steps in my path and, kind
Yeah,
of
that's right.
disrupts my life and unexpected and in unexpected ways. I've come to call
Yeah,
that God.
yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
good. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
not a bad working definition of God.
Mm.
hmm I
Well, as
wanted,
he
go
also
ahead.
said, it's like, an encounter with the self is always a defeat for the ego.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same thing, right?
hmm
Or the
hmm
the encounter with God is always a defeat of the ego.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, you take us on this whole journey. Like we said,
Yeah.
it's a very
Mm.
personal story. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about in it is you talk about your own struggles with alcohol. And I think like something of like a depth psychological perspective of addiction is something that I
Mhm.
wanted to talk with you about. I don't think I've really discussed it too much on the podcast, but like, how can we look at addiction as another opportunity for understanding ourselves and
Mhm.
for soul making?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think I just want to take a look at Gabor Mate has a wonderful definition of addiction, which is about it is trying to find a solution to a problem, right?
hmm
I really love that definition. And he says that in Hungry Ghosts. And um, so, like, if you look at Jung's definition of neurosis as, you know, something wanting to heal itself or make itself known, but for whatever reason, the ego is like not prepared to hear it or deal with it as so much a lot of mental illness is about. So soul's kind of wanting to go forward, or the psyche's wanting to develop. The ego's kind of going, I'm not going there for whatever reason. It needs to find another way, right? It often finds an unconscious way. So if you look at any addiction, shopping, compulsive, alcohol, looking at that symbolically, you can come to, like, for me to look at that symbolically, then there's a way in to kind of talk about what's underneath that, like what is trying to be expressed, or what is trying to be known here, right? And the
Hmm.
ego kind of going, I can't do that. For me, my system, my energetic system, my physical body was so dysregulated that all I was trying to do was just to try to calm my system down. That was what my intention was.
Hmm.
And so, that alcohol was an amazing thing to do that, as so many people who experience post-traumatic stress, you're just trying to calm your body down because it's just so agitated. But from a symbolic perspective, Jung actually identifies this when he was working with one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he talks about it as a craving for spirit. And so craving for spirit then turned into the 12-step program that, all the anonymouses are, whether it's food or codependency or alcohol, have kind of based this idea that it is a spiritual path. So I'm really clear about, like, as I was working with this energetically and symbolically, when I was trying to write about it, it was clear that it was a negative spirit that had kind of possessed me. And I wrote about it almost like I had a little bit of it when I was in Zürich, and that was mainly because I was alone, and, I'm in the depth of my stuff, and there's no support other than my analyst around me. But I started to create it like a figure.
Hmm. This is the demon lover.
Yeah, the demon lover. And it was
Hmm.
really clear about Liz. I was starting to go through, like, how it, you know, those kind of the how it kind of pulls me, like, it's so much of a seductive energy, right? It took me away from life because I was just so overwhelmed.
Hmm.
And it was in that moment of of receiving the invitation, that with, like, the Wayne Dyers and the Joe Dispenzas, what we talked about a little earlier, that I started to get a possibility of something else, and that's when the true kind of journey started. um, and for me, they were very positive figures, like a positive spirit. They gave me some ways to frame, what might be possible for my life, in a way that I could start to at least to go down a path of exploration,
Hmm.
which felt like it was actually really important. So I think the other thing that I talk about, in the book, was Guy Corneau's talk that he gave in Montreal at the IAP conference. Basically 3 or 4 weeks before my father died, and I couldn't finish the conference because I needed to get home, to end those kind of last weeks. But, he talks about his own cancer as a symbolic experience. I mean, he clearly he had to go through his own, the medical interventions, but he also looked at it symbolically. And I think that's very interesting to look at it symbolically, like where the cancer actually shows up.
Hmm.
And, for me, I think for my father, it showed up um, in his prostate, which is the seat of the masculine. And I think that was, although as well. Many, it does show up very men in lots of men in the prostate, but also I think it was also personally very indicative of what he needed to do in the face of my brother's mental illness. That's the way that I've kind of come to, understand that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so there's that, so just kind of like coming back around to
yeah,
adept psychological
mm,
working with addiction. One of the things that you're talking about is looking at it symbolically. And I think that goes to an idea that probably many people are familiar with, that if something is meaningful, it helps us to endure it, you know,
yes,
right?
yes, I love it. Yep, yep,
Yeah, so looking at it symbolically is finding the meaning in it that's not just the
mhm.
literal. Oh, he
Yeah,
had prostate cancer because didn't drink enough water and sat on his ass too much or whatever, these kind of like causal relationships. But
yeah,
it's like, just getting curious about it, opening up the inquiry, like, oh, the
yeah,
prostate, the root chakra, security,
yeah,
earth, that kind of thing. Cancer being like an overgrowth of cells and
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it just kind of opens it up more. And then there's, yeah, the physical reality of he had this affliction, had treatment or died. Yes,
yeah,
okay, but what
yeah.
else could have been going on?
Yeah.
um
Well, and it's also significant, I think, is that as the more my brother went off the rails, my youngest brother went off the rails with his own mental health issues and, his own weirdness,
mhm,
then that was when my father's prostate cancer started to spread. The
mm,
more stressful my brother's mental illness caused on the family, I'm not, there's no correlation, but in a synchronistic world, it's interesting that my father's who identity was about being very hopeful and wanting to be able to fix things and take care of people.
right, and then here's his own son who he couldn't help but couldn't fix.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if all of your identity is rooted in that,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really going to
Yeah,
mess with
exactly.
that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's like kind of one move. And then the other move that you touched on, that I just want to highlight is the personification.
Mm,
So, whether it comes to you or something that you kind of look for or develop, but there's this figure that emerges of this demon lover.
mm-hmm.
And then you can start to engage with it. You can wonder,
Yeah,
well, what are you here for? What purpose are you serving? Did I
exactly.
call you in, for some unconscious reason? And this is a journey that I went on. It was before depth psychology. It was revealed to me through shamanic work.
Mm,
Just this entity showed itself to me, and with it came this whole understanding of me having called it in when I was very young and gone through some serious trauma. And, it was related to my overuse of alcohol and all of this. And it all just came
yeah,
rushing in this revelation. And then it
yeah,
was a whole process of renegotiating the contract I had with this entity.
yeah.
And whether that was metaphysically real or not, it was psychologically real for me.
Totally. And I think that's really important, Brian. Really, really important. When people have these intense experiences, which may experience them, you may experience it outside of yourself. It it doesn't matter whether it's literally true, it's psychologically true. As Jung says, if it you that the truth is in the experience, whether because you experienced it, the soul doesn't make a distinction between what happens in our psyche or what happens outside. It's still still your experience.
Mhm.
And I think that's actually really important because lots of people say, "Oh, I had this experience. I think You must think I'm crazy, or you must think should be committed, or I had this thing, or whatever it happens to be." It's not, and they miss the point, and they cause themselves so much suffering.
Hmm. Yeah, because not only do you have to wrestle with this experience and not having a context for it, but then you're also feeling isolated,
Exactly.
and maybe judged or yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that just speaks to the larger kind of cultural problem of the denigration of the spiritual experience, of the visionary experience, of imagination.
Mm.
that other cultures that was maybe never lost, you know? And so you
Yeah,
just treat
exactly.
these
Yeah.
experiences as real because in your cosmology and your worldview, they are real.
Mm,
You
mm.
know?
Totally. And it's a lot easier to work with them and to, have an engagement with them if your belief system says that they are psychologically real, then are, it's so interesting. I when people talk about their dreams and they make a distinction between, the dream world, and I say the waking life versus
Mhm.
the dream life, they often people will say for waking life, they'll say real life as
Yeah.
opposed to the dream. And I'm going, well, and I'm not going to get into a big argument about that, but it's like that's I think that's part of the cultural, like if something happens inside, we don't think it's real.
Yeah, and we're so kind of covertly conditioned through the use of language, and so that's something when I started to work with people and their dreams
Mm,
is kind of deconditioning myself of like making that distinction between, and then in when reality,
mm,
when you wake up and you're in the real world and that kind of thing, and it was just
right.
like a kind of a vestige of the cultural conditioning around this stuff. So
Yeah,
I had to very
yeah,
kind of consciously try to exercise myself of
yeah,
that and. I
yeah,
love like what Hillman points out that in the Greek world, they didn't say we had a dream. They would say, I saw a dream.
yeah,
And just that
beautiful.
subtle
Yeah,
distinction changes everything. Like it's no longer
yeah,
this possessive thing that was, my mind created processing the events of the day and, it's all insular and only related to me or
yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah,
I saw a dream, just like I saw a vision.
yeah, totally. One of the things that I get just, gets my back up is when somebody says, "Oh, it was just a dream,"
Mhm.
and it's like, no, it's
Yeah,
not.
what a way to denigrate your dreams. Like, what about
Exactly.
the dream of your life?
Yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally.
Like if you can value the dreams you have during the nighttime, maybe you can start to value the dreams you have in the daytime too.
Yeah, exactly. Totally, totally true. Yeah.
Mm,
Mhm. So I think, the other thing about soul making, which I think is to really that to look at everything in our life as a symbol, like even like a synchronicity or you know, a weird thing that happened, like, the thing that happened in in the retreat room, when I
hmm
was in Peru. And it could be anything, like, sometimes, like, if somebody has a weird experience, they'll say, well, let's treat it like it was a dream.
Yeah.
And it just opens it up, right? Get curious, as you said, get curious, start to say, what is that? Open up a huge dialogue with these things.
Yeah. And let's be honest, Christina, you don't try and look at things symbolically. You just do.
I just do. Yes.
Yeah. And so that's something that can happen or happens. Um, And I'm always curious about that because, trying to
Mm,
help other people, like, because I
mm,
know how it'll change their life if they do start seeing things symbolically,
mm,
start seeing the deeper meaning and patterns of life and all of that. But to make that into a program, I don't know. Like, I think for
mm.
me, it was psychedelics and shamanic
Yep.
experience that kind of reawakened that in me, which was already there when I was a child.
Yep.
Right? And it wasn't something I ever had to try to do, like, oh, I got to remember to look at this symbolically. It was just
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
my archetypal or symbolic eye just reopened, like the third eye opening up. And it was
Yep.
like, oh
Yep.
no, I mean, there's synchronicity everywhere, and
Yep.
all of this has a
Yep.
deeper meaning and implication.
Yep.
So, I mean, do you find like that you have to kind of coach people in doing this, maybe kind of get the ball rolling for them or?
Yeah, well, I think that was one of the kind of the little bit of the motivation in writing the book,
Mhm,
because of demonstrating how to look at your life symbolically, because we don't really get a lot of people saying, "Oh, let's look at this weird synchronicity involving squirrel running across the road as a symbolic act, right?
The end of small talk. That's
Yeah,
that's my utopia is where everybody's speaking like this. God,
yeah,
you know, my indigenous soul craves that.
yeah, totally, totally. Um, and so it's, um, I
Yeah.
find it's really, it can be a little challenging, especially around, um, and it takes a long time in that kind of, week in, week out kind of private practice of working and trying to get people to think about their lives as a larger tapestry of things, and that their suffering has meaning. And especially with people who part of themselves are invested in the medical model, and taking medication, and going to see their psychiatrist and getting identified with whatever diagnosis they get, which I think is also a challenge of this particular time.
Mm,
And then to look at their life as a deeper meaning, that deeper thread that goes through, that that gives the resonance that we've been talking about. And it I have to say, it's a little frustrating, because you have a meaningful conversation with somebody in one session or whatever, and you get a little bit of a glimpse, and then 2 or 3 weeks later they're kind of thinking about it like just as, or just so, or in a literal frame of mind. And
mhm.
this is where I think Michael Mead's definition, the three levels of looking, like the literal, psychological, and the mythological, are really, really helpful.
Mhm.
And he had some amazing podcasts around, how traditional religion kind of looks at things in a very literal way rather
Yeah.
than a psychological way. I think, his contribution to this is really, really important,
Well,
really interesting. Yeah.
and to me, that just like really captures the difference between what I think of as conventional talk therapy, like CBT type stuff.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
dealing with one level of reality and
Yep.
one level of understanding of things,
Yep.
and that might be what you need at this time. And
Yep.
then the work that we do is dealing with those deeper levels, the
Yep.
the individual psychology and then the greater mythology and all of that. It's like the mythology is kind of like the foundation of that
Mm.
temple in a way. Um,
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
yeah, like these root stories, and I always have this question of Jung's resonating through my head of, he came to this question that led him on a quest. Like you said
Mm.
earlier, a good question will lead you on a quest. And the question that came to him is like, what is the myth that I'm living?
Yes. Exactly.
And the Red Book
Exactly.
is his exploration of that.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I did a a program for the C.G. Jung Foundation of New York, and it was interesting. And I asked, we went through an exercise, which is, what is the question? What is your most pressing question? And it was striking to me how many questions were at that victim level of awareness.
Hmm.
They were embedded in a why me,
Why me? Yeah. Hmm.
why me, like, or the question in itself gave a kind of a neurotic answer. It's hard to explain that, because I don't have an example right on the tip of my tongue. But it was like, the question, the way that they framed the question actually led them down a path that was just going to reinforce the negativity that was embedded in the question. And so that ability to ask questions in an empowered way that actually do lead you on a quest.
Yeah. Uh,
Actually, it's an art form. That's an art form. Yeah.
yeah. It's like a real Kean poetic art form to ask more questions that expand you rather than reduce you to some single causal event, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like opening questions rather than reducing questions or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That idea came from Sam Keen. He
Mm.
gave this talk that I found through Better Listen, living the questions, like in the early 70s. And when I heard, the way that he'd framed it, it was just like, oh my gosh, like that's it. And then Jung says, I am a question that the universe has asked of me, right? That we are a question that we have to find the answer to. I think is such an amazing idea.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
it's just such an amazing idea. So what is our question?
It's like Jung's just like dropping these things, right? And like each one of those could like form your whole lifestyle and approach to
Yeah,
life, you know? He's just like
totally.
dropping them out there, you know. What
Yeah,
myth am I living? You know, I'm just the question the universe asking of itself. And like,
I know.
I mean, well, for all his faults, pretty amazing dude.
It's very amazing. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you know, um, I do like I often say, as you probably heard me say this before, is that his chart, given the chart that we know, has 0 degrees of Aquarius on the ascendant, and I think that his whole psychology, all of his ideas, like his whole experience, is the seed for which the age of Aquarius is going to emerge. That feels to me very strong.
Hmm.
That somehow in his embodiment of his own particular journey, it's not, as you said before, it's not something that we go, oh, I'm going to become Jung and I'm going to do exactly what it is, but it's a model. It's a model of a journey. It's an invitation to explore some of his ideas and form our own red book or our own individuation journey. I think that's really what he's asking us to do. That's his invitation of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, and he really I think he tried to like drive that point home by talking about how people misunderstood the idea of the imitation of Christ, in
Mm,
that it should be for me to act just like Jesus did, that he's the
mm,
perfect model of how to be as a
mm.
human being. And Jung would say, no, no, no. The lesson here is to live your life fully, to follow your dharma, your path,
Yeah. Yes.
and to pursue that with all of your heart, all of your soul. That's the lesson. That's how you imitate him, not by
Yeah.
becoming Christ-like.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and he would say it in other words, like, don't be young. There's, I'm young. There's, one's more than enough, or whatever he said, right? With that twinkle in his eye.
Yeah. Totally. 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 Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting, it is part of the guru, idea, or the guru, we're all looking for somebody to tell us what to do. It's much harder to find our own path. Like it's really hard to find our own path, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even when the gurus like a J. Krishnamurti
Yeah.
says, it's a pathless path, and UG Krishnamurti, he said, "Don't follow me, I'm lost." Even though they say this, or like Osho, the same thing, he would always say like, find your inner guru. Don't
Yeah.
make me your guru. And
Yeah.
yet people do it. And this
Mhm.
is one of the things that you reckon with in the book is your idealization of Jung. And you say
Yeah.
it, I think at one point outright, that like Jung was my God, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
psychoanalysis was my religion. And so to
Yeah.
break that projection must have
Yeah.
felt what, disconcerting, but also freeing, like, because you're breaking with
Well,
something that gives you a sense of stability, right?
yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, talk about being lost. Talk about being disenchanted and disappointed and angry.
Hmm.
Really,
Like that
like
you'd been let down by
yeah,
these
yeah,
ideas or this practice.
yeah. I think being let down by the ideas, like and of course this is all unconscious for me, right? It's like I'm not. It's much in the same way that Job has to bring to his awareness his idea of God. um I think that was I went, oh my God, look, like I had just put like so much, but so many people do because the ideas are fantastic. um I mean, they're amazing, and they give the possibility of containing and understanding life in such a way. But the descent, in trying to find something different, everything got shattered. And as it was just like this, literally putting one foot in front of the other to find a new way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
Like you're kind of
yeah.
crawling out of the primordial ooze, like, oh.
Yes, totally. And it was like, here's where I think how we live the idea of Sophia and wisdom and intuition and the connection between the goddess Sophia and our intuition and the questions that we ask. Every once in a while I would have a felt sense of resonance around, what about that?
Mhm.
And I start to explore it, and that opened up a whole bunch of stuff for me. And I just and I know, and I can still feel it. Like, I can still feel it even now. I don't know, like 10 years later or however long it was, where I was sitting in the Four Seasons at, in the city of Toronto, where the opera meets, and you know Carolyn Mace is on the stage, and she talks about devotion to one's journey, and that just changed everything. Like, I just went, oh my God, that's what I've one of the things that I've lost is the devotion to my own journey.
Right. Yeah.
Eh,
Like hmm, loyalty and obligation to your acorn is maybe
yes,
how I'd put it in a
yeah,
Hillmanian
yeah,
way.
yeah, exactly. And it was why it was why that I, went into such detail about that, because it was such, like, I can still feel that moment of, oh, and then the
Mm,
Wayne Dyer thing, which is don't let the music die, inside you. And, that was an oh, like
mm,
the gauntlet had been like, was I going to sit in this morass, in this pity party, in this, dependence on alcohol for the rest of my life?
mm.
That felt like such an unappealing, prospect. I mean, so
Yeah.
unappealing. And it
There's
wasn't, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, please finish your thought if you still
Yeah,
got it.
yeah, I do. And it wasn't like at that point I was going to say, "Oh, I'm going to stop drinking." But what I was going to do was start to explore some of these things. And I remember, like, just like listening to podcasts, like tons and tons of spiritual, psychological podcasts when I would walk the dog. And it was just like there was, like, every time it like that fed me, that gave me something different to think about. And that was actually very, very helpful. And that was part of the way for me to get out of it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but
Mm.
it seems to me that that maybe until, your I mean, you've had many crisis points, geez, but like the one you're talking about coming out of with this, interest in the
Mm.
the kind of more the spiritual things like the
Yeah.
shamanism and new thought
Yeah.
and all of that. I wonder, like, do you feel like up until that point you were living maybe on or relying too much on the psychological understanding of
Yes.
life, and then
Yeah.
this whole thing allowed you to open to the spiritual and that whole mystery?
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
And I think that I have read this before, but I can't find who said it. Not sure if it was von Franz or one of the second generations. I wish I could find the quote. But what I remember, and this is my experience, is that we can only stay in the psychological so long,
Yeah, it's not
right?
enough to sustain us or to meet all of the great questions of life.
No, we have to move to the spiritual. And we just have to, and we have to broaden our perspective and get connected to our own spirituality. And I think we have that's just part of the journey, because then we just get stuck in a kind of a reductive, oh my God, this happened when I was like, 3, and
Yeah.
I'm never going to get out of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, for me it was interesting because it was like I had the spiritual awakening and then looked to depth psychology to offer me a
Mm,
framework that I could understand from my
yeah.
Western modern
Yep.
perspective. So it helped kind of ground my spiritual experiences.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So
Well, that
yeah,
yeah.
it just goes to show that like individuation is a personal journey and that it's not linear, that, first we start with the material, then we go to the psychological level, and then we open to sometimes it happens kind of in reverse for
Or
some people.
the shadow, and then the contrasexual, and then
I've got to
yes.
integrate my anima before I get to my animus problem and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, totally.
It's not the way it works. Yeah.
That's not the way it works. But I think the way you describe it is so perfect. And I think this is what Jungian psychology offers. Is people have experiences that they're trying to understand. And Jungian psychology, analytical psychology, is a wonderful framework to understand those experiences and to give meaning to it.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah, especially when in this age, it's been brought about by technology, but also something I think of the spirit. Uh,
Mm,
like it starts with all of the comparative mythology and comparative religion stuff that, came out of the 60s, Joseph Campbell and all of that, and Jung
yep.
himself,
Yep.
kind of opening up the Westerner to all these multivalent ways of understanding the world and our place in it and all of that. So this like great opening happened. And then, what happens is like, people raised in a Judeo-Christian context, maybe they start having dreams about Ganesh or
Right. Yeah.
Iemanjá. I'm speaking about my own experience here. It's like, what are they doing here? It's supposed to be Jesus and the apostles or something. Like, and then, so then you try to reckon with that and you go, well, am I kind of like a Hindu? Was I a Hindu in a past life or was I a shaman in a past life? Like, why are I having all these visitations? So
Right.
then what the theory of the archetypes gives you is a way to like understand and allow for open to those experiences of this great diversity that something has opened up for us.
Yeah,
And,
totally.
and in that cracking has been the dismantling of the, previous religious
Yeah.
orders and structures and kind of, beliefs and all of that, right? So, but it's opened us up to so much. And I think like
Mm,
Campbell and Jung and others have kind of been trying to meet that with
mm,
some ideas and some theory about like, yeah, I'm just, kind of like thinking on my feet right here, but there's something that's happened in this age of Aquarius, this great opening, and
mm.
we've been trying to understand it, I think, through psychology that's not merely personal.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean,
And
it's
I think,
fascinating
and
times.
totally. I mean, in an anxiety provoking kind of way.
Right,
Um,
like the old structures are no longer
yeah,
serving or they're
yeah,
cracking or whatever.
yeah,
Where does
yeah,
that leave us?
yeah, totally. Absolutely. Very chaotic. Very, very chaotic, which I think then this kind of individual, or at least finding
Yeah,
something that holds you, a practice that holds you and that gives you a sense of containment, whether it's meditation or yoga or journaling or whatever it happens to be, it doesn't matter. But people do need to find that thing that they that works for them,
yeah,
which is right, that holds them, that allows some access to greater sense of meaning, whatever that looks like. Dream work, finding community to do that kind of work, or finding a place to talk about some big issues and the questions of life, that kind of stuff. I think that's the way. It's truly, I think that's what's needed. um
totally. Yeah. Um, and that's kind of what I've been getting to with this DIY shamanism thing. It's like what I t tell people is like, even if it's provisional, and it probably is, but you need a kind of a cosmology to
Mm.
get through these chaotic
Yes,
times. So
yes.
be open to any kind of big story that just works
Mm.
for you. Don't worry
Mm.
if it's like big T true or not, but it's true enough for you.
Yeah,
And
totally.
I think if you kind of open yourself to it, some story will come to you. And
Yeah.
it's like what happened to me. I woke up one morning and it was all of a sudden this cosmology is like dropped on my doorstep, and it was just like, okay, let me write it down. Well,
Mm.
I don't know. Kind of works for me. It's like it's a little Platonic, but not quite. Doesn't quite fit that. And
Mm.
it's like about the soul's journey and what we're doing here. I'm
Mm.
like,
Yeah.
this is good enough for me for now.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's it. It's good enough for you right now. And it may evolve or may not, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's what you're living right now. And the soul, if the soul needs to give you a different path or a different idea or to add something to your toolbox, you, you will get inspired, you will get intrigued, you will find, what about that, and off you go, and you start asking a different question, and then all of a sudden you find, oh, it's evolved in a way that's different.
Hmm.
That I think is this real, for me, that feels like that's this embodied spirituality, also bringing the feminine into the body and allowing that felt sense to kind of guide us to what's next, whatever that's going to be, and being curious and open and
Yeah,
asking interesting
I
questions.
get you.
Yeah.
Like trusting that there is wisdom inside of you is like
Mhm.
trusting the goddess Sophia.
Yeah.
And so trusting that, like, I don't know, this story that came to me, this myth, this cosmology, it feels true enough for me.
Yeah.
And I gotta like, if I don't see that as valid, well, why not? Is it like
Mm.
the kind of like the patriarchy that I've internalized or something, And it's always got to be the guy on the pulpit is the one who's
Yeah.
got the true story,
Right.
whether that's
Exactly.
Gabor Mate or Jim Baker or Jim Jones. It's always a man with a convincing story up there speaking with authority. And like, how much have
Yes.
we internalized that and started to shut
Yeah.
down our own trusting of intuition, you know,
Yes. Totally.
and vision?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
It's hard. It's harder though, right? It's harder to
Yeah,
trust your own intuition than, like, sit in a hall looking at somebody who's hopefully giving us all the answers.
I wonder what it is for me. I mean, I've always been kind of anti-authoritarian.
So,
That's in my nature, I think, but also maybe it's like disillusionment, you
mm,
know, like with those actual
yeah, yeah,
figures who you've
yeah.
projected authority on or who claim it or whatever.
Mm,
But disillusionment can actually help open you to something else,
mm,
right?
yeah, yeah, totally.
It's like your
Yeah,
disillusionment with psychoanalysis as you were
yeah,
practicing it as a kind of religion with Jung as the figurehead. That got cracked open, and
yeah.
then you didn't lose it all, but it's a new attitude or a new perspective
Yes, absolutely.
emerged.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. More
Isn't it just
psycho.
like
Yeah.
it isn't it just like a kind of a wondrous mystery how all this stuff just happens anyway, like without us trying or like,
I know.
subscribing to some program of individuation or personal development. It's like, I don't know, the best thing you can do is like pay attention and try to see things with a symbolic perspective,
Yeah.
maybe.
So I think that's it.
Try to be in the Tao as much as you
Yeah.
can.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. And be open and curious.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, something came to my mind when you were speaking about Sophia, and I wrote it down. I don't think I've ever heard it before, but curiosity is the mother of wisdom.
Mm.
Because you're speaking about like following your curiosity and trusting
Yeah.
that, and yeah,
Mhm.
there's something about that. Hmm.
Yeah, and yeah, there's something really, really important about that, because that was the thing that actually led me out. Like, for me, um one of my favorite images of the alchemists is I think it's the Sora Mystica. You know, she's walking along, and behind her, about 3 or 4 feet, is an alchemist, and it's dark out, and he's got these glasses on, and he's carrying a lantern.
Mm,
And she's feminine, right? She's
hmm.
like she's in the feminine, and basically the alchemist has got the little lantern, and all he's got is these footsteps, and that's all he's going on, and
That's interesting.
he's
Y-
just following the footsteps. And
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's what we have to do. You've got some cards there.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking of the Hermit card,
Yes,
right?
yes,
And it's
yes.
like if you could think of this one card as part of a diptych, like
Mm,
who would be in the other panel? You
mm,
know, it might be I don't know, the world card or, you know,
mm,
something that represents wholeness,
mm.
you know.
Yeah.
Huh, yeah. Well, Christine, you know, it's great speaking with you. Like I said earlier, I was reading your book. I'm like, sh- this is someone I feel a lot of kinship to. This is like my sister from another mister. So it's been just so great speaking with you.
Oh, my pleasure. So I was also reminded of our first conversation oh so long ago, which had the same delight for me and energy and great conversation and good ideas. And so thank you for reaching out. It's so
Yeah.
good.
And yeah, I'll include links to your work. You're always doing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of ways that people can engage with you.
Yep.
You've got a newsletter and you send out
Yep.
weekly reflections and things like that. And then
Yep.
you've got this new book coming out, which I think, yeah, is going to really, I think it's going to really connect with a lot of people. And yeah,
Thank
in your
you.
personal telling of this journey, will give people a real idea of like, okay, how is how is all these ideas about soul making and soul and all that, how are they functioning in a real life that has its ups and
Yeah.
downs and challenges? Yeah,
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
stuff.
And how to bring some of these ideas into people's own lives, which is
Yeah, yeah,
really important. How do you live some of these ideas? I think that's what Jung wanted us to do.
great.
Hmm.
Thanks so much for your work. We'll see you down the road, hey?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.